Hello everybody and welcome to Story Time with the Odessa Library. This is Laura here and I am in Washington, D.C. on a special trip to publish a children's book. So I thought, why not do Story Time from a library in Washington, D.C. So behind us you'll see a large old building, which is the National Portrait Gallery. They have lots of beautiful art there, portraits, and all sorts of things. And here we are in the downtown Washington Public Library called the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. And as you can see, it is a beautiful big space. Just show it is. There are so many children's books here. It is pretty incredible. They also have a special exhibit of the snowy day, which we read a few weeks ago. So I'm gonna bring us back over here and we'll read a book about Washington, D.C. So, the book that we'll read is called This is Washington, D.C. It was written by M. Kasich, and it's a little bit older of a children's book, so some of the facts might not be exactly correct, some of the numbers and things that they include here, but it's gorgeous and very fun and very informative too. So let's begin. This is Washington, D.C. This is Washington, D.C. This is Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States of America. Situated on the Potomac River, it is a city of parks whose broad avenues, reminiscent of Paris, are lined with severe white porticos of classic Roman dignity. Washington's first and foremost resident is Uncle Sam. It is the seat of the U.S. federal government. The Congress meets here. The President lives here. The Supreme Court sits here. Foreign ambassadors reside here. Most business in Washington is government business, and the government is everybody's business. Nearly 1/3 of the 1 million Washingtonians work for the government full-time, and 1/2 talk about it most of the time. Miss Columbia was an early and successful competitor of Uncle Sam as a symbol of America. She still resembled, in the name Washington, D.C., District of Columbia. The poets called America Columbia after the Italian explorer Columbus, who discovered the New World. There's a portrait of George Washington by Gilbert Stuart in the Corcoran Gallery of Art. Washington was named for the first president of the United States. A general and the commander-in-chief of the War of Independence, George Washington was elected president in 1789. He selected the site of the president capitol, but was the only president who never lived there. The presidential residence was not yet finished at the time of his death. Here is the Corcoran Gallery of Art. Since many states wanted the federal city, as they then called it, to be on their territory, the decision was made to create a special district belonging to no state. In 1790, the District of Columbia was carved out of land originally part of Virginia and Maryland. The planning of the city was entrusted to a brilliant young French architect and engineer, Pierre Charles L'Enfant, who had served under Lafayette in the American Revolution. The Congress gave him a free hand, and he made Washington a city of spaceful, graceful vistas. The Washington Monument commemorates the founder of the city. It serves as a beacon to the tourist. The monument is in the middle of the mall and visible everywhere in the city. It is the world's tallest masonry structure, 555 feet high. Its cornerstone was laid in 1848, and after several interruptions, its construction was finished some 40 years later. For a dime, you can go up to the top of the monument, and you can either brave the steps, all 898 of them, or take an elevator. I'm guessing that price has changed, but still very interesting. The windows face the 4 cardinal points of the compass, and you can see the panorama of the whole city. But you don't have to walk very far from the monument to see the famous sights. Nearly all of them are around the mall. The mall is a 2-mile stretch of parkland in the heart of the city. Most of the museums, monuments, and memorials are there, and all the renowned federal buildings are nearby. The men of the U.S. Park Police are always ready to ride to the rescue of a lost sightseer. Many times as many tourists visit Washington every year as there are local inhabitants. They spend more time shooting Washington with their cameras than did the British shooting it with their cannons in the War of 1812. Washington photographs well, and it's open house for the tourists in many federal buildings. Here's a map of all of the sites, which we'll take a look at in a little bit. Washington's best season is spring. We're lucky for that, when the Japanese cherry trees around the tidal basin and the Jefferson Memorial are in bloom, and when Washington celebrates its famous Cherry Blossom Festival. Tokyo presented the trees to Washington at the beginning of this century. Some of the original 3,000 still bloom every year. Summer in Washington is very hot, and the winter is cold, but Washington is ready for both. Washington has many means of transportation, but street names can be a bit confusing. Some streets are numbered, some are lettered, some have names. And roaming around Washington, you can find yourself in 4 different streets with the same name or letter as you go from one quadrant of the city to another. It's all very logical, really, and a chess champion would probably get the hang of the system at once. You just keep looking for the tip of the Washington Monument. I took a subway to get here, and we were above ground and underground, and I've heard that the traffic is just terrible, so we avoided all of that by taking the metro. The Hill, of course, to Washingtonians means Capitol Hill, and the Capitol is the building that houses the Congress of the United States. The Senate meets in the Capitol's North Wing, the House of Representatives in the South Wing. Joint sessions of the Congress are held in the Chamber of the House. The states are represented in the House of Representatives on the basis of their population. The more populous a state, the more representatives. But each state has just 2 senators. The Congress shares power with the President and with the Supreme Court. Besides their offices, lawmakers have everything in the Capitol, from a watch repair shop to the best bean soup in town, served in their cafeteria. From the top of the Capitol's dome, the Statue of Freedom supervises the nation's top lawmakers. On the hill, too, is the U.S. Supreme Court. It is built in the style of a classic Greek temple. Its columns are of white Vermont marble, which turns golden in the afternoon sun. It was designed by Cass Gilbert and completed in 1935. Formerly, the Supreme Court met in the Capitol. The 9 Supreme Court justices are the supreme interpreters of the Constitution. If they hold a law to be unconstitutional, that's the end of the law. They meet from October to June. At the lawmakers' disposition is the Library of Congress with its 41 million items, which I'm guessing is more now even. It contains books, manuscripts, maps, films, photographs, sheet music, records, and probably more. Only its computers can keep track of it all. Among its unique possessions, displayed on the main floor, is Jefferson's original draft of the Declaration of Independence and 1 copy of a very, very early book, the Gutenberg Bible. In front of the Folger Shakespeare Library, you'll find this quotation from the Bard. "Lord, what fools these mortals be." But none of his admirers should be fools enough not to visit the library on their trip to Washington, for it has the finest collection of Shakespeareana a mortal has ever seen. Shakespeare's plays have been produced all over the globe, but the Globe Theatre in London produced them first. It was Shakespeare's own theater. This is a small-scale model. On the opposite side of the mall is the Lincoln Memorial, reflected in the reflecting pool. It is the West Potomac Park. It is in the West Potomac Park, a spot where President Lincoln is said to have liked to walk alone at night. The memorial, designed by Henry Bacon, was dedicated in 1922. Its 36 marble columns represent the states of the Union, which Lincoln held together. Inside is the statue of Abraham Lincoln by Daniel Chester French. On the walls are inscribed 2 famous Lincoln speeches, his second inaugural address and his Gettysburg Address. Lincoln the emancipator of slaves and the victorious leader of the Union in the Civil War, was assassinated on April 14, 1865. Ford's Theater, right here, where Lincoln was shot, is now a Lincoln Museum. Opposite Ford's Theater is the Peterson House, where the wounded president was carried and where he died. This house, too, is now a national memorial. Among other historical tableaux, Lincoln's assassination by John Wilkes Booth can be seen in the National Historical Wax Museum. Every American is carrying bits and pieces of Washington in his pocket. The Lincoln Memorial is on a $5 bill. The bills themselves are made here in Washington. This here is the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, which manufactures paper, money, and stamps. It started 150 years ago with 6 employees. Today, a few thousand persons work there. But of course, people have more money today than they did 100 years ago. Here, you see 10,000 sheets of white paper that will soon turn into greenbacks. 32 notes are printed here, printed on every sheet, 6,000 in an hour. Then, after being checked, the sheets are separated in stacks of individual notes and wrapped for delivery. Each brick contains 4,000 notes. It costs only 1 cent to make $1. Its lifetime is about 13 months. Anytime you walk through the glass and galleries of the Bureau, there may be $150 million in paper money around you. Wow. Those numbers may have changed, but at least this is what it was like in the 1960s when this book was written. Fascinating. The Jefferson Memorial was dedicated in 1943 on the 20th anniversary of the birth of Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of the Republic, the author of the Declaration of Independence, and one of America's most brilliant presidents. He was a philosopher of democracy, and many of his then radical ideas have since become the common property of mankind. Inside, quotations from Jefferson's writing are inscribed on 4 panels surrounding his 19-foot bronze statue. Here we can see the statue. One reads, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." Democracy, meaning that many people, all people, have the right to vote who they elect as their, in our case, a president. Now let's cross the mall again and visit the president. He lives in the White House. The White House got its name when the walls were whitewashed after the British had left a charred ruin during the War of 1812. Tourists are welcome in Mr. President's house, but his living quarters on the 2nd floor are not accessible. The White House has 132 rooms, 20 baths, and a swimming pool. The president is the most powerful man in the United States, but not the best paid one. His salary at this time is $400,000 before taxes. and he earns every cent of it the hard way. His daily schedule is published every day in the Washington papers. Were published in the Washington papers. Have you heard the latest? And here you see Mr. President flying off on some business of state. His helicopter lifts off from the lawn of the garden behind the south lawn of the White House. No outsiders are allowed in the garden except children once a year for an Easter egg rolling party. In the foreground is the 0 milestone from which all the distances on DC roads are measured. A few steps from the White House, across Lafayette Square, is St. John's Church, called the Church of the Presidents. Inside the President's pew, the State Department departed from this building some time ago and now is an executive building. The President sometimes holds his press conferences here. It is, in a way, an annex of the White House. The street between it and the executive building is blocked off and not accessible to the public. The State Department recently moved to these bigger and better quarters to match the bigger U.S. involvement in world affairs. Besides helping the president to develop foreign policy, the State Department issues passports, runs the Peace Corps, and maintains liaison with the UN, United Nations. The Pan-American Union is the permanent secretariat of the Organization of American States. The building of the secretariat is owned by all the 35 states of the OAS. Its most beautiful feature is the patio with trees from South America, a coffee tree, a rubber tree, a banana plant, and many others. This, here at the top, is not an imported Scottish castle. This is the headquarters of the Smithsonian Institution, a museum complex on the Mall. James Smithson, a British scientist, left his fortune to the United States to establish in Washington an institution for the increase and diffusion of knowledge among men. There are some 143 million items in the Smithsonian Institution. In the Arts and Industries Building and the Air and Space Museum, you can see everything that flies. Outside, there are rockets and missiles. And balloons, too, on some days. Inside, there are historical planes. The Spirit of St. Louis, the plane flown by Charles Lindbergh on the first solo crossing of the Atlantic in 1927. The Freer Gallery of Art, also a Smithsonian museum, has a magnificent collection of Asian art. Don't be afraid of this, down here, guardian at the entrance. He is made of wood and he is nearly 1,000 years old. He's as Japanese as the cherry trees. Across the mall is the National Museum of American History. Inside, you'll see the original Star-Spangled Banner. It was the flag that flew over Baltimore's Fort McHenry in the War of 1812. Joyous that the British hadn't taken the fort, Francis Scott Key wrote a poem, The Star-Spangled Banner. It was then set to music and became the U.S. national anthem. the Senate subway car, which ran between the Capitol and the Senate office building from 1915 to 1961, when it was replaced by a later model. It made an average of 225 trips a day. Capacity, can you guess? 18 passengers. A mid-19th century pioneer locomotive. As you walk toward the Museum of Natural History, you'll first meet this impressive creature with an impressive name, Triceratops prorsus. But you don't have to be in awe of him. He's a fake. He's made of cement. But there's a real one inside. There are so many young visitors in all the museums that some teachers and excursion leaders mark their groups so they won't end up with more or less children than they began with. As you see, they wear different identifications. See the different IDs there? There are some pretty weighty phenomena of nature in the museum. This elephant weighs 12 tons. But that's nothing compared to this blue whale, which weighs 60 tons, or did when it was caught. For this is a fiberglass mock-up. It is not real. What the blue diamond is, it is called the Hope Diamond. It weighs 45.5 carats, and that's a whale of a diamond. This is the Museum of Natural History. In the National Gallery of Art, you will find a painting by just about every famous artist whose name you can recall. Here, A Girl with a Watering Can by Auguste Renoir. Here, Ginevra de' Benci by Leonardo da Vinci. Older art lovers are offered a guide. Tiny art lovers are offered free transport. In the National Zoological Park, which also belongs to the Smithsonian Institution, you can get a look at two celebrities. The white tiger, presented by an Indian Maharaja, is to President Eisenhower as a gift to American children. She's the only white tiger in captivity. Her name, Mohini Rewa, the Enchantress of Rewa. Meet Smokey the Bear here, who appeals to Americans on posters to prevent forest fires. Smokey was rescued from a forest fire in New Mexico by rangers in 1950, and since then has lived in Washington. His fur is a rusty brown, but nonetheless his name is American Black Bear. He is behind a glass panel, no autographs. The most important national documents are preserved in the National Archives. Among them is the original of the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution. In the rotunda, these precious documents, sealed in bronze and glass cases, are protected from harmful light by special filters. Here, the Department of Justice on Pennsylvania Avenue. Here is also the national headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, better known as the FBI. An FBI guide will show you the pictures of the 10 most wanted men exhibits from famous spy cases, and captured arsenals of notorious gangsters. The FBI has more than 250 million fingerprints on file in the Identification Division. At the end of the tour, G-men show their marksmanship, but on duty, they are allowed to use the skill only for defending themselves or to save lives. I think I read in the back that these tours no longer happen, but at one time they did. The Department of Health and Human Services is the home of the Voice of America. Let's go for a tour around its studios. The Voice of America broadcasts information about American political and cultural life in 44 languages to millions of listeners and viewers all over the world. There are 27 studios and 4 television studios, and from each you can hear and see broadcasts in different languages. The Master Control. The Voice of America started during World War II, and its first broadcast was in German. It said, "The news may be good or bad, but we shall tell you the truth." This has been its policy ever since. Here is the Pentagon, the top command post of the U.S. Armed Forces. Just to march across one of its several immense parking lots toward the entrance can give you a bad case of battle fatigue. The Pentagon got its name from its geometric design, but its name has become synonymous with the U.S. military top brass. For the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps have their offices there. But there are some 23,000 others working in the Pentagon building. The commander-in-chief of this huge military machine, however, is a civilian, the President of the United States. The Secretary of Defense, too, is a civilian, and his office is here in the Pentagon. Here, Georgetown is the oldest part of Washington, a district of beautiful old houses as well as cozy small taverns and bookshops, an exclusive residential area, and also an artist's quarter. Georgetown used to be a port. It is the eastern terminus of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. By the way, it is named for George II, the British king, not George Washington, the American president. In Georgetown, there are many strange visitors, as you can see. Very strange indeed. The Arlington National Cemetery. Veterans of all the wars of the U.S. Let's start over. Veterans of all the wars the U.S. has fought are buried here. On simple tombstones, you can read the names of admirals next to those of seamen, of generals buried side by side with their men and women. Astronauts' graves are also at the Arlington Cemetery. But most visitors pay their respects at the grave of President John F. Kennedy. His brother, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, is buried nearby. Not far from the cemetery entrance is the U.S. Marine Corps War Memorial. The most famous news photo from World War II was the model for the memorial. It represents the flag raising on Mount Suribachi on the island of Iwo Jima. In that battle, 6,800 Marines died and more than 20,000 Japanese. Iwo Jima was returned to Japan in 1968. the statue of President Andrew Jackson in Lafayette Square. Goodbye, Mr. President. Could you tell the other Mr. President I liked seeing Washington? Certainly. He lives just across the street, and we see each other every time he looks out the window. And here in the back are some details of updated facts and figures for today. So thank you so much for joining me with This is Washington, D.C. Let's go check out some of these places we read about. Okay, everybody, so we are down on the street from the library, and behind us is the National Gallery, Portrait Gallery. So let's take a walk down toward the National Mall. All right, let's go.
Don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing. It don't mean a thing, all you gotta do is swing. Makes no difference if it's sweet or hot. Just give that rhythm every little thing you've got. It don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing.
So here at the Martin Luther King Jr. Monument Memorial, I'm going to wrap up story time. Thank you all so much for taking this journey with me, exploring this new place of Washington, D.C. I hope you all get the chance to explore here or anywhere new. It can be a little scary, navigating your way, trying new things, meeting lots and lots of new people, but oh my goodness, it's so rewarding. There's so many places in the US and around the world to see in such a short time that we have, but I hope you take the leap and do it. Thank you so much again, and see you next week. Bye-bye.